Hey guys, my name is Tori Letzler. I'm a composer and vocalist for film and television. You may have heard my voice in some of your favorite superhero movies from the likes of Marvel and DC, or maybe you've heard my score for Netflix's In From the Cold, which is a series streaming now. So today, I'm here to talk to you about Native Instruments and iZotope have an incredible sale on a bundle with KOMPLETE 13 and the Music Production Suite 4.1. You can click the link in the description box below and learn all about it. Now today, I'm going to be using the KOMPLETE 13 Ultimate Collector's Edition. This is the biggest bundle by far that they have done, and it includes STRAYLIGHT, Fairlight, Mysteria, the Cremona Quartet, and one of my personal favorites, ARKHIS. Also, if you're into mixing and mastering, we have a bundle from iZotope, which includes Ozone, Nectar, Vocal Synth 2, as well as RX 9, which is basically all that you need to bring your mixing and mastering up to professional level. Now today, you're going to see me walk you through a really cool little video of a bunch of guys finding a giant monolith in the middle of the woods. It's got a little bit of a scary vibe, a little bit of sci-fi, and I'm going to take you through step-by-step my scoring process, how I use these instruments to create a complete soundtrack. Let's get into it. Okay, so now that you guys have had a chance to watch my little Monolith video, let's get a breakdown into how I made the track. So the first thing we're going to start off with before adding any instruments is just how we set up this session. And as a composer for visual media, even though this track is only 40 seconds long, it still has story points that we need to hit. Now, the first thing I do would be finding a tempo that hits the beats of the video in a way that feels natural and smooth. The second thing I do is I make my markers, which hit key story points. So in this case, because it is such a short track, we don't have too many markers, but they are each equally important. So we have our sneak peek section, which is like the moment the camera angle pans up and we start to see glimpses of what the men in the woods are looking at, this monolith thing. We have our big moment and pause, which is when we finally get the glory of what this thing is that they're looking at in the woods. And I wanted it to have a dramatic pause moment. And then we have the beginning of our climactic end, which is when we start getting to see the reactions on the men's faces and what they're staring at. You'll also notice that I have a slight meter change, and that's because I wanted the music to hit cuts. And in order to hit all the cuts, just keeping it at this tempo in 4/4 wasn't necessarily doing it. So I had to change one bar to 3/4 to be able to hit exactly on our cut. And that's something that's very typical in scoring. We change tempo and meter all the time in order to be able to hit cuts without making anything feel too abrupt. So let's get into the actual track. Now, the instruments that I used the most were definitely ARKHIS and STRAYLIGHT. I used other stuff as well, and this whole bundle, you could just use that to create an entire soundtrack, period. But because we're leaning towards sci-fi, I definitely did ARKHIS and STRAYLIGHT probably the most. ARKHIS for our more orchestral elements, and then STRAYLIGHT for our really weird, dark sound design. And then I also did some live vocals, which I used iZotope for our kind of mixing and effects section, which I'll get to in a bit. So let's just hear this intro that is mostly ARKHIS with a little bit of STRAYLIGHT in there. And I'm just going to solo our ARKHIS elements. So you can tell it's just little hints of mystery. Now, one of my favorite instruments in this group is this right here. I'm using this whichever way the wind is blowing preset. And I made a note that I changed one of the 3 layers to waterphone. Now, something that's really cool about this is while this instrument is mostly built around effects and orchestra, there are some cool little additions. And not only that, but you can change each layer in every preset, which I took the opportunity to do here. The reason that I added in a waterphone element, let me play that real quick. So what a waterphone is, for those of you that may not be familiar, and how they've encapsulated it so incredibly digitally here, it is a bowed metal instrument, and it's quite often used in things like horror and sci-fi. Now, having this with our area-affected orchestra, it just adds this like mystery and also width and loneliness and emptiness, and it's just a very cool combination. And I love the fact that I can change any element that I want within here. I can change the pitch, I can alter the volume. But the fact that I can just, start with these amazing presets and work my way up from there is great. Another particular instrument that I really love in this intro, also from ARKHIS, is this preset, Far Cry. Now, if you can hear that those orchestral elements as well as the wood ones, they're kind of holding a note but also bending in and out. It's very like John Williams-esque, Close Encounters of the Third Kind. Obviously, we have this mysterious monolith, sci-fi, so we want to feel a little bit otherworldly and alien. I love the fact that within this single preset, it feels like you have both orchestra and these like almost affected like alien voices or language in the background. And it sounds both organic and also affected at the same time. It fit the scene that I was trying to do perfectly. And the only thing that I added on here was a little bit of external reverb. You'll find that most of these instruments that I've used from the bundle, I'm not affecting outside of the actual instrument itself because I don't need to. Holding down our bass, we have some STRAYLIGHT using this preset, Subsonic Flight. Now again, something I like with this instrument, as I did with ARKHIS, is you can control multiple aspects of it. I have two separate samples playing at the same time to create this preset. We have our basic sine wave turned on, and then this washed on wobble for the grain. Now, I can affect where the sample starts and stops. I can affect the bass, the treble, how much of the filter there is. I can go in here and affect the grain itself, go in, affect each sample individually, which is really, really cool. And then I also have, basic effects. We have filters. I can also mess with the EQ of each individual instrument, check with the cutoff. So again, that's why I'm not using any external plugins. You don't need to. It's all there for, your pleasure. So here is another really cool instrument, and I have this under my metal section because it is almost little metal. It is from STRAYLIGHT. So it's almost a combination of percussion and also this like metal bowed instrument. It's called Darkness Approaching. And let me solo this again so you can hear it. So you can see the two individual elements. That like low subby percussion thing is this side of the sample, the sub sustain. And then on this side with the grain, we have this soundtour sound, which is giving us that like weird metal aspect. I love instruments that are multifaceted, and that's something that STRAYLIGHT is particularly good at. I do have additional percussion elements in this track, which I'm using Action Strikes, which is another Native Instruments tool. But to have these two things combined when they're both low end already, I think that's really helpful. It's great. It saved me time. So let's listen to that again. Just that like, hard, strong, like it sounds like a real person is playing that. It doesn't sound like a digital instrument at all. It sounds like I took like my cello or my waterphone and recorded it myself. So that is one of my particular favorites in the intro, and I use it throughout the entire track, and we'll get to that in a second. More STRAYLIGHT here. Just access to like these really weird alien sounds. This is pretty much just the preset, and then I have added something in to kind of give it an arpeggiated feel, and it's panning a little bit, but the actual sound itself is just STRAYLIGHT again. and it sounds like a weird, like alien chatter. And I've gone in here and I've done a few things. I messed with the reverb a little bit, which I'm actually going to bring up just a tad. Yeah, that's way cooler. Now it just feels like it's like floating back and forth in this like mysterious zone. One of my last favorite elements, there's a few other things in here, but just in the intro, more STRAYLIGHT. And it's this subsonic flight, washed and wobble in the grain section, and then we just have a classic sine wave. And it's just holding down this is in the key of, I believe, A, just holding down, giving us some nice depth. So before we go to the next section, something I did do on the iZotope side of things is I made a layer in here of some hum vocals. Let's listen to that. Now, it's meant to sound really freaking creepy, like really off-settling, mysterious, like we don't know what's going on. Kind of took a cue from Johan Johansson's score for Arrival, where he, used voices to cue the aliens. I think it's really effective. And let's check out what's going on in here. So I have 2 iZotope plugins going on with the vocals. First of all, kind of just a hum wavering by itself isn't that exciting. However, I've run it through this awesome Vocal Synth plugin, and I believe I'm using a preset. Let's see, the preset I'm using here is, Oberon's keys. And typically when I use Vocal Synth, you can go in here and you can change your key, major, minor. I have it set to chromatic a lot of the time when I do a sustain note, because if I, go slightly off pitch, I can correct it. But I tend to not pitch correct myself with cinematic stuff. I like hearing the little wavers in the voice. So that's why I've set it to chromatic, so it kind of shifts along with my voice. And I'm going to go down and bring this polybox down just a tiny bit. In this preset, we've got some delay built in, some chorus, and then obviously the vocoder, which is kind of like our star. And then for the other effects, I'm using the EQ that's built in with Nectar, as well as their built-in reverb. And again, I'm going to just like boost that a teeny tiny bit. Let's hear that again. So you can tell when I boost it, you can hear how many like layers that vocoder is adding. So it sounds like a grouping of voices instead of just me humming alone in my studio. And that tends to save me a lot of time. I use Vocal Synth in that way a lot, not only just for scoring, but in my production electronic side project, Tiny Cat. A lot of people will spend tons of time recording doubles of vocals. And often I will just use Vocal Synth and copy over the same vocal multiple times. And normally that would cause phasing. But with Vocal Synth, because I'm adding vocoder layers and doing so many weird things that are changing the performance, it tends to cancel out that fading, and it saves me a ton of time. So let's move on to the rest of the track. Here's our little build section. So one of my favorite instruments in this track, I actually had it on one channel originally, and then I split it into 2 because it's the same instrument. Depending upon the way it's played on the keyboard and the velocity, it takes on a completely new form. So these are both the same instrument. And so that's using STRAYLIGHT's as wide as, and it's under keys. Now, what I thought was super cool about that is that if you have this sustained, it does this like weird, almost metal bending thing, which has been kind of a trend throughout this whole video. So let's play it again real quick. First is I have it doing an ARP or a pattern that I made later on, and it's functioning as quite literally just the keyboard instrument. I think that's a prime example of what's so good about these instruments is their versatility just within the same preset. I never thought that this, right off the bat, if you told me these were the same preset, I would never know. And the fact that I'm not doing anything really externally besides I have Ozone on it, which I am boosting with some compression. But it's really just how the notes are being played and if they're sustained versus not, which is changing the instrument. And so you have what's giving it that difference is we have this prepared upright piano sample on the right-hand side, and then we have the guitar harmonics as the other sample. So obviously the guitar harmonics are giving you that weird bowed metal effect, and the piano is giving you the keys. But depending upon how long you hold out that sample, it changes which you're going to get. And I just think that's super cool. And I figured it out when I was just messing around. It wasn't something I did intentionally. I held one down versus took my hand off real quick and then figured out what the instrument did. And all I'm doing on here, besides what's built into that, is I'm using the vintage compression in Ozone to just make it a little more present. And I'm on the smooth mode. So this is our big finale climactic section. Again, we have another vocal, which I'm going to solo real quick that I recorded. So I'm sure, as you guys know right off the bat, there is definitely some effects going on in that vocal. So I have Vocal Synth as well as Nectar 3. I love the presets in here. If you want to build your own presets, which I have done in the past, that's great. But there are so many to pick from. Acute Angels under this section, Lush, happens to be a favorite of mine, and it's something that I use all the time. It's so wide and makes it sound like there's so many voices being grouped together. Often when I'm using this preset, I bring the vocoder way down because it has almost this like distorted quality to it, which sometimes is great. And when I'm doing more electronic-based vocals, it fits great. For this, I just want a little bit of that vocoder, and I'm prioritizing the polyvox over here. And again, I'm using the chromatic mode, which I mentioned before. I just think that with some of the cinematic vocals I do, setting it to chromatic mode just suits it better. I'm also using Nectar 3. And I think I used a preset here as well, this vintage Starlight preset. And I didn't just use it as a preset right out of the box. I adjusted it from there. But because I knew I wanted to have a lot of things going on, I figured it was best to start from a palette that already existed. So we have some saturation on here. I'm doing some de-essing. I have 2 separate compressors. And then we have EQ and the reverb set all the way up because that's sci-fi. We gotta boost that reverb. And all I'm doing down here is just automating some of the volume as the track progresses. So let's hear it built in with the rest of the track. So now we're starting to hear some low orchestra. And one of the things that is holding down the majority of that low chord is this from ARKHIS. So something that's cool about that is we kind of have our like cello range, lower strings. But again, all of these ARKHIS instruments are really multi-layered. So we have this like dulcimer layer that's adding like some hollow high end almost. So it feels, again, very, very wide. It's just a whole section basically playing in this Seven Hills preset. Let me play that again. I'd like to point out that this particular preset responds well to volume and modulation. As you can see, I have it really swelling up and down here and then swelling at our final chord, which I really like because you don't want an instrument that doesn't respond well to modulation and volume because it takes any reality out of it. The way, real players play is they swell into stuff. There's emotion, there's inconsistencies. So when a company goes out of their way to put that into their instruments, I think it really adds to stuff sounding real and not, robotic and computer generated. So again, let's hear how these ARKHIS instruments, the higher stuff, is functioning in the back of the track. like really big, wide, I like to call them space chords. I'm going to add in that little ARP key we have from STRAYLIGHT. Now, I think as far as, these are all very light top-end instruments, they still have a lot of depth. They're not just sounding, bright and kind of tinny. They all really cut through, but they have a lot of width and depth to them. And a lot of that is just the built-in effects that you find in these instruments. I'm going to sideline to some percussion that I have going on here. And that's just the action strikes. So I'm using two separate instances. This instance, I'm just using a basic loop. I just wanted something that was low, was going to keep the movement without overpowering the rest of the track. And I'm also using Ozone on here, again, with that vintage compression that I do like quite a lot. The other instance that I'm using of it is this really cool single hit. And that single hit is under the big cinematic hits. It's one of the designed hits. And I think it just sounds like very big and weighty, and it carries over some moments of silence. So I have in our big pause moment, let's go back a little bit. Obviously, just a single element in that big shot of the monolith, but it's carrying that like weight and sub that like, I don't know, if like a spaceship was landing or something, you would feel the earth like vibrating under you. It feels important. And that's why I chose to use this. It also works really well with that bowed percussion that we have from STRAYLIGHT. I feel like they just really flow into each other and it sounds like they're meant to live together. Okay, so now that we've gone through each individual section, the last thing we have to do is our mastering and mixing. Okay, so the last piece of this cinematic puzzle is going to be using Ozone 9 as our limiter and our EQ on our master bus. So you can see here I have my two mix underbuses, and I've popped Ozone 9 in. And I started with the Breath of Headroom preset, but I kind of delineated from it quite a bit. Let me play this for you. So that's with it on. I'm just going to turn it off real quick so you can see the difference. And I hope you hear the difference. I certainly do. And I can tell you what I hear and how we got there after this. But let's just see if you can hear it. Yeah, so even A being it right there, the thing that I did with Ozone that I found particularly helpful with this track was under in our imager. And that takes apart your bass, your mid-range, and your top end. And one of the things that I loved is that you can take each section of the track tonally and move it around to see what fits best. So, for example, I wanted to make the top end in this track sound wider. Let's just hear. It's giving a width to the top end of the track, and this happens to be a very bright instrumental without making it sound harsh. I messed around with our low end a bit, and then I used the dynamic EQ so that we're really able to have control over each individual element of the track. And then also, the biggest thing for me is I often clip. I like to really push my tracks, so I have to be careful. And having a limiter on there to really help monitor where I'm at is very helpful. I won't, send any track in without a limiter. So I'm using the vintage limiter in here. Thanks so much for hanging out with me today while I did a breakdown of my Monolith video using native instruments and iZotope. And I hope these tools will inspire you to create something on your own. And if you liked this video, you can like and subscribe to the channel for more content that's similar. I'm Tori Letzler. Have a good one.